Welcome to Turek Books Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm your host, Joshua Turek. We're never going to read all the books we want, but when someone tells us about a book, that's its own valid form of experiencing it. Our guests come in to talk about the books that left lasting marks on them as readers, and that becomes a springboard to who they are, who I am, and maybe who all of us are. So sit back, relax, and enjoy it. And who knows, maybe you'll end up grabbing a book or two. Maybe you've read some of them and it's nice to hear someone else talk about them. We want this to be like a book club, but without the guilt. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Turek Books, live at Bad Animal Bookstore, my favorite bookstore in Santa Cruz, California. I'm so excited for our guest today. He's been on the show before. I'd have him on every episode if I could get him. So grateful to have him again. He's a writer. He just wrote a memoir called Comedy Samurai. Without further ado, Larry Charles.
Happy to be here, man. I'm glad to see you again, and happy you have found a new home.
Yeah, thanks for now. Happy to. If I've learned anything, it's the greatest modern luxuries in life are to have your own kitchen and bathroom. That's what I've learned this year, and we still don't have that. But we're adapting. We're adaptable. That's also the greatest strength. So the greatest strength is adaptability. The greatest luxury, your own kitchen and bathroom.
Yeah. Well, at least the kitchen and bathroom is something that is attainable in the future.
Yeah.
You'll get. I have confidence you will get there.
Thanks, Larry. Yeah. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm alive, as I like to say. I don't like to say I'm doing. I said I was doing great to somebody the other day, and they were like, well, how? How could you be doing great? It's like, it's true. The world is so, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse, but the world is so fucked up, that, and there's so much suffering going on that it's hard to, I had lunch with a friend the other day, and we were having this really nice lunch and kind of catching up, and you start to think about, oh my God, all the suffering that's going on while we're being served this meal, it's hard to reconcile, but in the midst of that, I personally am doing good.
Yeah, in your sphere of control, you're doing well. It is disorienting,
Exactly.
And keeping in mind not everyone really thinks about the rest of the world. And yeah, I come to find it's the last 10 minutes of every conversation I have that I turn into an hour about the suffering of everything. It's like if we could just walk away before that, I think we're in a better mood, but I always get it in on the phone with my brother. We'll have a nice, pleasant call, and then I'll start launching into the drama of everything, and our awareness of it is unprecedented. We know more about every facet of suffering in our world than any humans ever have, and we are existing among it. It's in our neighborhoods.
We're exposed in an unprecedented way to it, and are also at the same time, because of that, maybe more powerless to do anything about it, except on the most local, right in front of us kind of level,
Yeah, that's right. They've really turned us into passive observers. The more we know doesn't mean that we're empowered by it. It actually means the opposite. And what a damning thing to be a person who cares about other people right now. And,
in the Bob movie that I did, we had a line, the more you know, the more you suffer, and that's kind of the reality, if you turn away from it and you shut it off, then maybe you can kind of go about your business. And it's almost, even under those conditions, it's very hard. I'm in Ventura right now, and ICE is patrolling the streets, and people out in the fields are running, it's like, you're just trying to get to the CVS or whatever, and you're being exposed to the horrors, So it's almost impossible, even for people that want to avoid it,
Yeah, that's right. The island of privilege is shrinking, even for the most privileged. It's being shrunk in by, I don't even want to call the billionaires privileged. I think they're actually the most cursed among us in our society, who are addicted to greed and sucking up all that's good about humanity for their own material addiction, I guess.
And there seems to be a larger percentage of cold-hearted sociopathic people who are not moved, who see it and observe it and witness it and are just not moved by it at all. And some of that is a defensive mechanism to survive, and some of that is some kind of like disconnect that's going on in our minds and our chemistry that's kind of changing the nature of who we are, you know?
And then the even sicker part is some people, I think, side with the bad people in the world, you know?
Well, yeah, I think that's very, very true. Absolutely. They root for the bad people. And we've been sort of conditioned to do that, you know, to a large degree. And people don't realize how much that conditioning has influenced their decision making.
How did you how did something I think about, because you and I are very aligned about the world and just kind of caring about people. Not to say we're perfect people, not to say we're not full of our own selfish flaws, but I think so. How did you work in Hollywood as long as you did? Because even some of the even how are you so much cooler than some of the notable people you've worked with?
I think that I think thank you for that. I mean, I try, but I think for a long time I was oblivious, you know, and I think I was able to keep the world somewhat, you know, at arm's length to some degree, you know. But I started off doing, you know, writing jokes, as you know, writing jokes and seeking material, and then writing sketches also kind of thrust me into looking at the world to find material, you know, and I really feel like in some ways that had a lot to do with it. My looking for comedy forced me to look at like politics and social issues and things like that that I could satirize in sketches. And I think by doing that, I was exposed, therefore, to a lot of the horror that I then used for fodder for comedy. But I think that when the comedy was over, those things kind of stuck with me, you know, and slowly over the years, that part of me just kind of expanded. I became more curious about how the world really worked, you know. Again, for initially maybe for a selfish reason, because I was looking for material, and then I think it sort of like it overwhelmed me, like how the world really does work, you know. So I think that was a big foundation for me, like it probably is for you. Looking for the material kind of forced you to sort of expand your mind, you know, and expand your interests. And I started to become like more fascinated by how messed up things were and how corrupt things were and how crazy it was and surreal it was and how we accept that. And it was hard to, I was able to use it for comedy, but it was hard to turn away from it when the comedy was done.
Damn. Okay, that's fascinating. Yeah, by just following your curiosity. I mean, it makes sense. It's got me thinking like, yeah, I just liked reading books, and then one book leaves you with a little piece of information here, and you know,
Yeah.
the next you like this author cuz he writes about sleazy things, and then oh, he also has a Vietnam novel. Oh, and that wasn't
Right.
right. What else wasn't right about that? You know,
Right.
I'm talking about
Right.
Dennis
Well,
Johnson now, but yeah,
Dennis Johnson, one of my favorite writers, by the way. I mean, I love Dennis Johnson, and Jesus' Son. You know, I remember my mind being blown when I read that book, and then went and read almost everything else that he wrote. And he died prematurely, which is a tragedy. But he was an amazing writer who looked everywhere. I mean, you know, he really kind of had a very expanded view of the world, and was fascinating. Every book he wrote was kind of fascinating in a different way than the other ones. You know, he wrote great novels. He wrote beautiful nonfiction. He wrote more political and social stuff. He really, really kind of filled us with a lot while he was here, you know, so you have to appreciate that.
yeah, you do.
I was just going to say that also when I was a kid, I grew up in a very kind of cruel, sadistic neighborhood. I just am finishing the second book of memoirs, you know, which deals more with my childhood. So it's all very fresh in my
Mm,
mind
mm.
how sadistic and cruel my neighborhood was, Trump Village, when it was actually called Trump Village, you know, and you know that people just treated each other horribly, and there was a lot of, kind of random violence. And so that also sensitized me to some degree, very early on to people suffering. I felt very guilty when I didn't do something about it. I was never somebody who committed those kind of acts, but if I didn't try to jump in and help somebody, I would feel guilty. I would often try to jump in and help somebody, and it was futile, and just witnessing a lot of things, and kind of wound up planting a lot of that sort of sensibility in my mind.
Yeah. Speaking to what you were saying earlier, it's like, yeah, it's a gradual progression of understanding, still understanding what's right and wrong about your own direct world and then the world at large. And yeah, I think books help us do that. You brought up Jesus' Son by Dennis Johnson, and I feel like that's connective to a book you brought last time you were here, The Last Exit to Brooklyn. Those
Yeah.
kind of like
Yeah.
sleazy, but palpably human books, um,
Yes.
stuff. But you're working on the earlier days.
Right.
Have you had to go back to therapy yet for uh,
No, it's too late for
okay.
therapy. I did, I did do a lot of therapy years ago, and of course, as I talk about in the other book, my therapist, like at a very crucial moment in my therapy, my therapist died,
Ooh.
and so I was kind of left on my own. But in a way, that was his blessing to me. In a sense, he was a great man, very wise man, and so I was able to internalize a lot of what he had said to me, and I still carry that with me a lot of the time. That's a kind of a dialectic that goes on in my mind even now. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's a lifetime for all of us to process, and it's a continual process, as we change, our perception of those things and our interpretation of those things change also.
And even while we're having to process the present moment, there's that little person with a typewriter in the back of our head doing God knows what, falling asleep on it. But yeah, it's happening. And so, yeah, how's
Yeah.
your reading life these days? Are you getting time to read while you're working on this second memoir?
I'm not sure why it happened, but I have suddenly gotten back into I've been reading a lot. I think the last time I was on, I brought some of the books with me, but I was also telling you how I use the Kindle a
Yeah.
lot as well. But I really kind of got into the physical books too, the holding of the book. Sometimes the discomfort of holding the book while you're laying in bed and trying to find a position to turn the pages and get enough light and all. I mean, I kind of got into that struggle, and I was enjoying reading books, actual physical books. And then I went one step further, and I started getting into novels, which I think I had, when I was on with you, I was showing you novels that I had read in the past that had a massive impact on me. And I started getting back into novels again. And again, I haven't gotten back into Pynchon or William Gass or some of the people that are, you have to really kind of commit to long period of time reading them, and I love both those authors, and I've read books by them, but this last pass, I've gotten into more like genre stuff, and trying to find that high quality genre stuff, whether it's science fiction or noir or, crime stuff, or even nonfiction as well. I'm in the middle now of reading a book. I left it in the other room, called City of Night by John Reshy. And it's kind of a classic. It's written in the 60s, and it's about, he was a gay hustler
Mm.
who also was an amazing writer. And so it gives you this kind of underbelly of San Francisco, of Los Angeles, of New York, and it's a big, big book. And so I'm only like 100 pages or so into it, but it's kind of telling you about a world that really doesn't, I mean, the world of like sexual transaction obviously still exists, but the world of these cities that is portrayed in that book they're sort of gone. They've kind of disappeared. And I found I was very interested in whether it was Edward Bunker or, Jim Thompson or some of the other crime writers, how they portrayed like Los Angeles and San Francisco back in those days. I found that very kind of, I don't know if it was nostalgic, because I used to love movies also, and I still do, that are shot on location. Even like Dirty Harry, for God's sakes, is shot on location in San Francisco. And you see a San Francisco of the 70s, and it reminds you how, I don't know, how uncorporate Los Angeles and San Francisco were at that time. They were like loose, and they didn't have like all this. They weren't like overly structured cities. They were just like there, and you could kind of walk through it. I was in the middle of watching a documentary about Lawrence Ferlinghetti and City Lights, which is a really good documentary. I don't know who made it. So I was looking for books that had that kind of setting, and that's when I started. Charles WIliford, I have a Charles WIliford book here. He's another crime writer. I found that the noir writers, when I was a kid, I read a lot of Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett, but I didn't realize there's a whole nother generation of crime writers who really are really good writers and tell a really interesting story, like Jim Thompson or Charles WIliford or David Goodis. And I even found, like I'm a big fan of Patricia Highsmith, who did the Ripley books. And I found another female noir writer. Her name is Dorothy Hughes. She wrote this book, In a Lonely Place, which was a very well-known movie in the 50s, I guess 49 or early 50s, with Humphrey Bogart, where he plays a screenwriter with a bad temper there's a suspicion that he may be a murderer, and it's a cool movie, actually. It's a real noir movie. But I read one day about the actual book, and apparently they really sanitized the book to make the movie, So I became interested in that, and I read the book, and the book was fantastic. I mean, as just a literary, it's not even like a high suspense thing, really, but it's just really a great novel about Los Angeles in the 40s, and told from a different point of view than you normally get. This woman, Dorothy Hughes, is a great writer, and you get this sense of Los Angeles in the 1940s with the fog and the incline in Santa Monica, and just, it's like a mysterious place, and she really depicts that very well. And the character is, in the movie, he's not the murderer, and they completely change it. But in the book, he's the murderer. He is a murderer. He's a serial killer, and in the 1940s. And again, that it's much more interesting. Like, I wish there was a true movie version of that book. And how often do we wish that? Of course, it never works out. Another book like that is this. This is this Charles WIliford guy that I'm talking about. This is called, I know it looks backwards here. You go on TikTok and people are talking about their books and they're holding it up. And it's like, well, what the fuck does that say? This is called The Woman Chaser, which is it seems like a pulpy sort of a title, but and I don't even know why it's really called that, actually, but it's really about a guy who's, again, in Los Angeles, in that period there. Maybe this is like early 60s. And he is a used car. He's like a great used car salesman, but he has this yearning to do something else. He wants to do something else, and he wants to make a movie. He has this kind of crazy idea to make a movie, and actually wills this thing into existence, and basically just tosses everyone aside to make this movie. And the insane obsession of that, the delusion of that, is really what the book is about, And so I thought that was a great, and again, these are pretty short books. And that helped me also kind of go through some of these books. Another book that I've been into, I don't know if you're into this, if you've been turned on to this guy, Josh, but this guy, Willy Vlauten, do you know him?
No. What's he about?
He was in a band, which I also highly recommend, called Richmond Fontaine. And he's basically from Reno, and he writes about like the underbelly of Reno, but with a great compassion. And unlike some of the other books that we talked about in the past, his view of this is always a great. People have drinking problems and the crime problems and all these kind of realistic things that they're struggling with, and they're suffering, and they're just barely getting by day by day. And he has a very, very sympathetic eye for those people, and obviously knows these people really, really well. And if in his band, Richmond Fontaine, it's kind of the musical version of like these kind of books where he basically is like telling short stories really in music, and I loved the music of that he did. And then I read there was a writer named William Boyle who I follow on Instagram, and he was touting Willy Vlauten as a writer, which I knew nothing about. And by pure coincidence, I happened to watch a movie called, I think it's called The Night Comes or something like that, or The Night Will Come or something like that. And my wife and I watched it without knowing anything about it. And it turned out to be an adaptation of one of his books. And it's about a young woman who's got a kid and a very unsupportive mother, and she gets into a debt situation, and she's got to go out and try to get the money in 24 hours to pay off these people or pay the price, And I think the movie is a lot more melodramatic than the book, like a lot of these things often are. They will take the most melodramatic aspects and enhance them. But again, it was like about this kind of underbelly world of Los Angeles or wherever it was actually, I think, Portland or something like that. But he writes a lot about Reno and about Portland also, where he lives now. And the motel life, as it turned out, I didn't realize it, is also a movie. I think it stars Stephen Dorff and somebody else, and I can't think of it. I haven't watched the movie yet, actually, because the book is so shattering that I don't know if I could take the movie, And it's about two brothers, and one of the brothers, they're both kind of, for lack of a better word, they're sort of losers on the, the wrong side of the tracks and just trying to get by, but they're good guys, and they love each other and they care about each other. And one of the brothers, just purely by accident, runs a kid over and winds up killing the kid. And rather than go to the police, because they've already like been in trouble and everything, they run away together. And it's about that. It's about them running away and then finally coming back and facing it and, not being able to escape who you are, what you've done, And so it's a very emotional book, but it's not cheap sentimentality, you know what I mean? It's like, it's real. It feels very documentary-like almost, and yet there's also this poetry to it, which, as a musician, he sort of has that natural inclination to find the poetic in the very mundane, and so I love that book. And I'm looking forward to reading another book by him. He has a few books out. So that's somebody I got really turned on to, just kind of a human story about people struggling, But I've also been reading, science fiction as well. I like science fiction, but only certain kinds of science fiction appeal to me. I'm not into space opera. I'm not into hard sci-fi, the scientific, technological sci-fi. I really like sci-fi that sort of takes place on Earth with real people and reality just being skewed. That's why I like Philip K. Dick so much. A lot of his stuff is just like regular people who suddenly, like him, he had this vision, He was just a guy living in his house and he saw this vision and it changed him, And, I read this book. This was also, there's a great used bookstore here in Ventura also. My wife and I have gone to, and the library here in Ventura has a used bookstore in it as well, which is kind of cool. You could go into the library and actually buy books, to raise money for the library, which is nice. And this is a book called The Stochastic Man by Robert Silverberg, who was a very classic 1960s, the same kind of period as Dick, has written a lot of books. A lot of them, when I read the summaries of them, they don't interest me so much. They're like space stories and, they take place on other planets, and even Dick's work like that is of less interest to me, But this is about like a guy who has the ability to, he can't necessarily see the future, or predict it, that like a psychic, but he takes all the elements, the stochastic elements, the likelihoods of things happening, and is able to make predictions based on that. And he gets involved in a presidential campaign, and he meets a guy who may truly be a psychic, who kind of like lives a reclusive life. And it winds up being kind of a political satire and really, really interesting also, and very grounded. I guess I like grounded science fiction, and those are some of the books that I've been reading now. I mean, but I've been trying to keep them to like, I'm not trying to do big, thick books right now just because I don't have the time. I'm also I'm finishing these memoirs, the second book, and I'm also writing, pretentiously enough, I'm trying to write a
All
novel.
right.
And, um, and so I also, it's like I don't want to be influenced too much by what I'm reading. So I'm also trying to pick things that aren't going to make me go, wait a minute, I have to go this way with the book, or they'll drive me crazy until I finish these books. So these books have all been really enjoyable. I can't wait to each of these books that I just showed you. I couldn't wait to pick them up and finish them, to the point that I wouldn't put on the TV. I wouldn't watch a movie. This was my entertainment, as well as edification. And that got me back into the reading vibe, the reading habit of like, well, you could read instead of throwing on the TV or looking at YouTube, or, there is this, there's a great world that you could get inside your mind here by reading these books. And I really, really kind of rediscovered that recently.
Yeah, it sounds like you're on a hot streak.
Yeah, I have. I have a bunch of other books that I'm hoping to get to as well.
Okay.
But those are the ones that I just finished recently.
Yeah, it's like I always say, like, just find a book that's more addictive than your phone.
Right.
Don't overthink it. Don't try to go weighty, go heavy. Don't think you need to read what people tell you need to read. Follow your
Yeah.
interest in it.
Yeah.
It really seems like you're reading for pleasure right now, and that's really inspiring.
Yes, exactly. I'm reading for pleasure. That's exactly it. And look, I will read, as I'm sure you do, I'll read book reviews of books. I mean, Pynchon's the most obvious example, but there's a book that came out. I read a review of yesterday by this woman. She's only written a couple of books because she gets so hung up that it takes her like decades to really write the book, and she'll have a nervous breakdown in the middle of it. And she goes through a lot to make these very, very thick books that are filled with allusions to other things and charts and all kind. And it sounds fascinating to me, but it's almost like I need to take a year to read that book. And so and at some point, maybe I would like to do that again. And there are times in my past when I did. I mean, Gravity's Rainbow was like a year-long project for me to really read. I mean, I got like pretty far into it, and then I was like, I have no idea what's going on here. And I put it down and I had to start again, but I did because I was interested, and I eventually got through it. And I still don't, I've had to read the Gravity Rainbow Reader to help me kind of work through, like Ulysses is like that also, where you need, if you're, that's why it's good to read those books in a class, really, with other people and a teacher, and you sort of can get some other perspectives on it that you might have missed. But I'm not able to devote that kind of time right now, because time is short, and I want to get my own work done as well. So I am reading for pleasure, and it has really worked out well. I feel very enhanced by just even the act of reading, of using my eyes and my brain for that task has made me feel good as well.
I wonder also if it's a response to just how bad looking at your phone has become, where it's like what we were talking about earlier, the helplessness, the powerlessness, this looming sense that what we're looking at our phone is coming for each of us at some point in time, and how are we preparing for that? And it's almost like you've been repelled by what's on your screens, back to the basics, back to the books. And yeah, it just seems like it's inspiring hearing about how you're reading. Don't mean to examine the reasons and bring my own take into it, but yeah, it's cool.
You're right, though. I mean, I'll look at the screen, and I could get into like a scrolling thing, just like anybody else. And at a certain point, like the self-loathing starts to infect me, and I'm like, why am I doing this? It's like, and sometimes I'll just stop and just do nothing, like I'll just stop and think, which is a pretty radical act these days,
Yes,
and I'm lucky, like you are, that our job essentially is to think, and then to figure stuff out as a result of that, whether it's our material or whatever. So I will do that occasionally. I'll just stop I'll just I'll realize I've hit the wall here. What am I doing? What am I getting out of this? And I'll just stop and I'll start thinking. And the other thing that I will do is pick up the book, and just start reading. And immediately I feel like, oh, wow, I'm in a world now, like of somebody else's imagination, and I can roll with that. And I find that unusually satisfying.
that's great. Oh yeah, what's the name of the used bookstore in Ventura that you're liking so much? Can you?
Holy shit, I'll never
Yeah,
remember the name
no,
of it.
it's just the place you go. Don't even sweat it.
It just says used books outside,
Well, and you're not
Um,
too far from Bart's Books in Ojai. I don't know if you ever.
Bart we go to quite often, actually. Bart's Books is an amazing bookstore.
That's
And
cool.
the Bart's Books we love, and I've bought a lot of books at Bart's Books since I've been up here in Ventura.
Cool.
We've gone a lot, my wife and I, and we'll spend a couple hours there wandering around. This place in Ventura is more like the old-fashioned secondhand bookstores, like very, it was a hoarder, it's a hoarder
Oh,
person,
love that.
Yeah, it's just like packed. It's like, it looks a little like where you're at right now. It's just packed with secondhand yellowed page books, of all kinds. It's like almost absurd. You don't see that much anymore, and it's a really really cool store actually. And there's a few. Ventura does have a few good bookstores actually.
That's great.
There is a kind of, and Bart's Books, of course, is one of the crown jewels of bookstores probably in the country.
Yeah. Yeah, indoor outdoor for people who don't know, nestled in a really beautiful community. Yeah, I went on comedy tour this summer and every city I went to, that was like my activity. Go find the used bookstores and it's just yeah, it's pretty much my favorite thing to go treasure hunt, You're treasure hunting. You're seeking out ideas and even just the aesthetics of certain books. But yeah, you're digging for ideas about the world in the
And I
physical.
grew up at a time before, tapes and computers. And, if you wanted to see a movie, you had to go to the movies, and if you missed something on TV, that was it. It wasn't going to be on again. And there were lots of, used bookstores in Brooklyn where I grew up. And for, a quarter, you could buy like a world, and that was a beautiful thing, and libraries. I mean, I was encouraged also my mother would take me to the library, and like that was a thing that you would do, it was crazy. We would actually like just go to the library. That was an activity, and having a library card and taking books out and reading them, and I also had the good fortune of having a next door neighbor who worked for Simon and Schuster, and his kids did not like to read. And so he would bring home piles of remaindered books. And he knew I liked to read, and so he would give me books. He would say, here's like books I just brought home from work. So I had tons of books, most of which, my grandfather wound up throwing away when we moved out and all this kind of stuff. But I was able to be exposed to books without tremendous expense. I didn't have any sense of, first editions or whatever. I just love to have books. I love the smell of them, the physicality of them, and that's what I'm saying about recently. I've sort of gotten back into even that physical act of reading, which I think is good for you, and I encourage more people to do it. I think, and I was lucky also that my kids were interested in that as well, and so they're all kind of like readers.
Well, that's cool.
They do read as a kind of as an activity.
You grew your own book club.
Yeah, right, exactly. Although they read totally different things than I do. We rarely have overlap.
Okay.
But I'm appreciative of the fact that they're, if I talk to them, they're often like in the middle of a book. And so that's cool. I'm happy about that.
That's really cool. I want to get to your next wave of books. One thing that came to mind is do you think the destabilizing element of your year and the fact that you've kind of had to start over reinvigorated your reading because you've like gone out and I see you've got a bookshelf behind you now. It's you got some books. Whoa, yeah. I mean, I don't know how far
Well,
you want to
yeah,
get into that, but you and I both were affected by the Palisades fire. You much more than me, but yeah,
yeah, my house totally burned down, and with it, my wife also, by the way, we both had, tons of, we had like lots of bookshelves, big tall bookshelves like you have behind you, and they were all filled with books that we've had for many, many years. Now, my wife was a much better planner than I was, and so she was able to at least take some of the books that meant something to her. I kept thinking, oh, well, we're going to come back to the house, and I didn't. So books were not something that I took because I thought we're not going to lose them, but I did. I lost them all. And so we have been, slowly, going. That's one thing we've been doing while we've been in Ventura. Like I said, the library, the used bookstores, even the new bookstores, going to Bart's Books, and buying new books, and used books that we haven't read, but also replacing books. It's like, oh yeah, that's a book that we lost. Let's get that. And so we've been also trying to slowly replace books. So I've gone from like a room, like this entire room at one point, my office in Malibu was like covered, all around with books, to that bookshelf right there. That's what I have now. But it's cool, and it's been fun to sort of replenish, even on that level. And I am reading all those books. So that's also satisfying. So seeing it, is kind of nice. It's nice to be surrounded by it. I have to say, it's nice, even this small amount, it's nice to be surrounded. And that's something the Kindle does not give you. Kindle is great for traveling. It's like you can throw your iPad or the phone, take with you, and you have 100 books there at your disposal. But the idea of being surrounded by books and like, oh yeah, let me look at this, or looking something up, or that kind of thing. That part of that experience is something that I always enjoyed as well, and trying to recreate it on a very small level right now.
yeah. Well, it seems almost like a fascinating and unfortunate but fascinating exercise in editorializing your previous collection. You're like, okay, what do I really miss? What, when I see on the
Yeah,
shelf, am I hungering to get back around me? Because books give off an energy. Books contain magic, and you, like you said, you want them around you. It feels better being around books than not. And so, yeah, it's almost like, have you seen some that you're like, oh yeah, I had that book, but I could actually leave that. That I,
yeah, yeah. There have been some, and there's, also I was very into. I still am, I guess, into like esoteric knowledge, and so I had a lot of, sort of alternate histories and things like that.
mm,
And those are great. And so I have been replacing those when I see them. Something you can't get a lot. The problem is a lot of those books are not available. You can't just go to Barnes and Noble and buy that book anymore.
right.
So you have to track it down a little bit. And of course, the tracking it down is part of the fun also. Finding a book and going, oh wow, when we were in the used bookstores, and like going, oh wow, I can't believe they have this here. That there's a kind of a great satisfaction in, like you say, it's a treasure hunt in a way, and when you find the treasure, it's very satisfying.
Yeah, very satisfying. That's encouraging, and it's fascinating hearing about that and rebuilding your collection. And yeah, this sort of vigor for reading right now. Yeah, also thinking about the noir thing you were talking about with San Francisco. People talk about how much that city has changed, and it absolutely has. Not for the better in a lot of ways. The tech companies for the last 20 plus years have really hollowed it out culturally. But there is a thing when you're in San Francisco, they've retained a lot of their old street signs. And the way those
Hmm.
signs are written, the fonts they use, the neon, whatever the case may be, the bones of that city still retain some of what you're talking about that culturally doesn't exist quite in the same way. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just such a good
San
feeling.
Francisco geography also. It's like you can bring the high tech stuff in. You can build tall buildings, but you can't change the geography of that city, and that ties it always to the older version of the city also, I think, in some ways, and Los Angeles too. I mean, look, they have paved over Los Angeles so many times. So many of when I came here in the late 70s, so much of that cool architecture is gone, But by the same token, if you're willing to explore, you can still find it. There are examples of it that will immediately place, and certain movies, both for San Francisco and Los Angeles, that captured that time.
Yes.
And you could really, like, even TV shows like Dragnet, which, took place like in Los Angeles in the 60s. So you get a sense of what the valley looked like in the 60s, or downtown, those kind of buildings, or watching Superman as a kid and seeing the Daily Planet building, and then coming to LA and realizing it was City Hall they used as the Daily Planet building. It was very exciting to me. The pantry, in this in a couple of these books, they meet for dinner at the Pacific Dining Car,
Dang.
or at the pantry and places like that. Musso and Frank, which is actually still there. Those places tie you back to the past in a kind of a good way, and that you want to hold on to on some level. Not to be mired in the past, but to be connected in this like a continuum that we're part of. That's how I look at it. I don't feel like I'm nostalgic for it, but I feel like it's real, and it's been kind of covered up, like so much of our history gets covered up. And in a way, like, revealing that is liberating,
Yeah, that's the Western disease, the consumerist disease. It's cutting us off from our history, cutting us off ancestrally. Like, most of us don't really know ancestrally what's going on. Many of us, a lot more than others. And then, but also the fact that, like, this consumer society wants us to live in a vacuum where everything is now, everything is the next thing. But, like, no, we exist within, like you're saying, a story. And how cool when you have these physical landmarks that help represent that. Have you been to speaking of, you said you like reading esoterica, have you been to the Philosophical Research Society in Los Feliz?
I have been there. I haven't been there in many, many years, but I have been there, and I've sat in there and looked at stuff. We also went, my wife and I went up to the Krishnamurti Foundation up in Ojai, where, again, it was like built in the 50s or something, and they have all his books there. You can kind of sit. It's got a very 50s kind of architecture to it. It's up in the hills there in Ojai. So, yeah, those kind of places are very cool to me. But so many of the old bookstores are gone, When I first moved to Hollywood, it's hard for people to even relate to this, but Hollywood Boulevard, especially off Hollywood Boulevard on the side streets, they were filled. There was at least like a dozen used bookstores, run by these kind of cranky, misanthropic guys who, like, they were abusive to you, if you asked for a book, but they knew where everything was in this kind of crazy hoarder's paradise. And you could buy books for so cheap there, and you could talk about books with this guy, and all of those are gone. All of those would just kind of close down at a certain point and just couldn't make it. So there were such great examples of those kind of things, at one time. That culture, and again, I think it's part of what you're talking about, this sort of repressing of that culture, that sort of flattening of that culture, that sameness that people are trying to sell us now, this kind of algorithmic version of life, which was not something that I grew up with, and that even I'm sure you did not grow up with, and that we sort of resist naturally. It's like you don't want to fall in line, and that's really what all the pressure is about now, is to fall in line, like the same things, even with all the choices we have. We really have no choice, which is so ironic,
Yeah, people talk about, there's been a lot of talk recently about Cisco food distribution, and you start going to restaurants in some regions of the country, they can't get food from anyone other than Cisco, and you see this,
Right.
you see the same jelly packets on your table, the same ketchup bottles and hot sauces, and you realize, oh, everyone's just in a cooking competition with the same exact generic not well sourced ingredients. And yeah, just that extrapolated to everything is
Everything.
what, and then like the behavior modification that comes with that and what we're being nudged toward. Like you're saying, you said earlier, you're reading these books and they remind you of LA and San Francisco when you could move freely through them. And that's it, right? Is it's not an algorithmic movement. Your phone map isn't giving you the top 3 places that bribed them to tell you where to go eat. It's like
Yeah.
you're figuring out where to go eat, or you ask the guy at the gas station how to get there, and all those things. I will say I went back to LA. I'm loving going back to LA as a visitor. I've never done that because I'm from there.
Right. Right.
I've been twice now for comedy and poetry, and I will say Echo Park. My friend Tim just opened a used bookstore, Reverie Bookstand. There's stories, there's despair books, there's a couple others. Like it's happening again, but it takes a lot of fight and a lot of luck.
Well, two things. Let me say, I don't want to, one of these I don't want to forget. One thing is that when I came out to LA, and this is a really in keeping with what you're just saying, I would just get lost. I would just get lost and try to figure my way back. And in doing that, I would wind up learning about the city. And, I would, drive through Silver Lake and the hilly streets of Silver Lake, or Echo Park, or South Pasadena, or, there were so many kind of like communities that were like older communities that were fascinating and had their own character. The other thing and so I would get lost literally, and not worry about it and I'll figure out my way home, and that's how I did it, until I could afford a Thomas Brothers or whatever it was. The other thing I was going to say, you mentioned the bookstores that are opening up like in Echo Park. Another great book I read, and I let me get it. It's back here. I want to show, if I could find it. Of course, it's called. I'll tell you what it's called though. It's written by a guy. He's a British guy who's like a LA expatriate, and he lives in Los Angeles, and he works at Story Books. That's what I've been told.
I've been hearing about this. What's this book called again?
Called Service, and it's by a guy named John Tottenham. And I highly, highly recommend that book as well. That is, again, it's a short novel. It's probably 240 pages or something. And it's about him, this very misanthropic, angry, kind of disgusted with the culture guy who works as a clerk at a bookstore. He's a middle-aged guy working as a clerk in a bookstore, and a very literary guy, so well-read. And by the way, he's also on Substack, where he posts little kind of observation short stories about going to Tulsa or driving through Memphis or, places like that, Mississippi, like through Highway 61. They're great as well. I mean, I really highly recommend them, and he like stays at old hotels and goes to the bars and, he's really cool. And Service, the novel, is about him, or a guy like him, trying to write this novel and realizing it's kind of pointless in this society to even be writing a novel. No one's going to fucking read it, and he's so resentful of it, but it's also hilariously funny because of that. People come into the bookstore, like, I guess, Stories, and they're like looking for, the most commercial books. And he has such disdain for them, that he will throw them out of the store, and he doesn't own the store. He just works there, and so the owner gives him a hard time and everything. And he's trying to figure out how to write this novel and why he even cares about writing it. And that's the novel that you're reading, so it's a fantastic book that I really, really highly recommend. One of my favorite books of recent times. It's called Service, and his name is John Tottenham. And I also highly recommend checking out his Substack, which I do often because he constantly posts really, really fascinating stories about just getting in a car and driving and stopping at places, doing a lot of what we're talking about, but not even LA or San Francisco, but like even more obscure towns with seemingly little to offer, but he finds life there. And Fascinating stuff. Great, really great stuff.
Yeah, it's
I'm glad I remembered to mention
yeah, it's the
them.
second person. You're the second person who brought it up. The owner, Andrew, the owner of this bookstore I'm in right now, Bad Animal. Andrew just told me about that book, and he just gave me a Lawrence Ferlinghetti book of poetry because he said I had to read it because it was related to what I do. And you brought him up too, so it's
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
taking note of these cosmic things. Stories too. The register at Stories is a little elevated, and they are grumpy there. And so, if
yeah,
you ask them a dumb question, they're looking down at you like a judge would,
yeah.
and almost like they should have a gavel back there and just be like, "Boom, get out of here." No, we don't have Matthew Perry's memoir. Or
Right, right. This guy will not. John will not tolerate it. He just doesn't have the patience to deal with the stupidity.
yeah.
And it's a self-destructive thing, because people want to sort of connect with him, and he will just like he has too much disdain to really even connect with people, and winds up being a very lonely guy in a lot of ways. So the book has all those levels to it that really, really make it great.
Well, and how cool the adaptability of human creativity, like up against this ugly world of AI. That this guy who works at a bookstore is mourning the fact that the book he's writing about the bookstore will be read by no one, and he's doing it within the book, thus making it contemporary and relevant to us. And books survive again. You've read it. A guy I talked to this week read it. Like, it's alive, and I don't know. There's something really cool about that. Like, we can always respond to our world creatively and create new worlds from it.
Yeah, and you can, and it's surprising, at least for me, it's always surprising what you relate to, because it's like he's a despicable character in a lot of ways, in a funny way, I mean, he's just like got no patience for anybody, and yet at the same time, if you connect to that id-like dark side of yourself, you know that that's in you as well, and he's not trying to put a gloss over it. He's giving it to you unvarnished, and yet the book is extremely eloquent, well written. It's beautifully written. It really is. He's a poet. That's been his main thing is poetry, and this is his first novel. And you could see that in just his descriptions of the bookstore and the people that come in. It's never just thrown away, and it's never mundane. There's always something kind of elevated about it too. Just a really, really fine book.
Yeah, I mean, no better place for people watching than Stories. It's a wild cross section of people. I'm glad it's there. You're reminding me of a book that I think you'd love. It's a slim book too, a couple hundred pages. It's called Ablutions. It's by Patrick Dewitt. You may know him from, he wrote a book called Sisters Brothers, which was like a real quirky Western that they ended up making a movie with John C. Reilly and Joaquin Phoenix.
Right,
But
right. I know the movie.
Ablutions is about his time bartending at this dive bar called Three of Clubs on Santa Monica and Vine. I think it's still there. It's right up against Manny Pacquiao's the gym, wild card boxing gym. This real like there's a military surplus store across the street, and yeah, it's just a sleazy guy behind the counter, life self-destructing book that it really hits home. And it
That sounds like right up my
yeah
alley, man. Right, and literally right up my alley. I know exactly what you're talking about, also, because we used to have an office on. I used to have an office in the lot on Santa Monica Boulevard, and I would go up to that military surplus store, and I would often look in that boxing club or whatever it was there. I thought that was a fascinating place. I wish I could hang out
you
there,
can.
and I would yeah, right. I never did. And I noticed that lounge all the time. It's like one of those kind of lounges that seemed like a great place to have a drink also. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know that place really, really well. And I used to have an office when I was doing Seinfeld, like in the hiatus, I would rent an office in the building on Hollywood and Vine next to the Pantages. There's a tall building there that in those days was just an office building that was mostly empty because who wanted to have an office there? But it was great. I would pretend like I was a private detective, and like
There was a
a
diner.
little off.
There was a diner at the bottom floor of that building, right?
Exactly, and the Pantages was next door, and then the Frolic Room, I guess, was on the other side of that. It was all of those things were there, and the May Company was across the street, and the Brown Derby was still there at that time, actually, on the other side of Vine. So yeah, I spent a lot of time, and I lived in Hollywood when I first came out here, so I spent a lot of time in those neighborhoods and loved them. And there's still a kind of a little bit of that left, but a lot of the charm of it is really kind of gone, unfortunately.
Yeah, there is. It's weird. I moved to Hollywood at 18 years old with my sister to Franklin and Argyle, and it was,
Right.
yeah, 2003. It was like everything was still shut down, a lot of abandoned theaters and whatever. And yeah, it was just kind of like
Yeah.
broken people, broken buildings. There was no investment in it quite
Yeah.
yet. It had seen its better days, several different waves of time. And yeah, I still get a little nostalgic walking up and down Hollywood Boulevard because yeah, there's something about it that like there is yeah, I don't know, there's a real human element to it. There's you still feel that Days of the Locust energy.
Right. Also a fantastic book, by the
Yeah,
way.
fantastic
One of my
book.
one of my favorites, Day of the
Day of the
Locust.
Locust.
Love Day of the Locust. That's a good movie as well, I thought. It's not exactly the book, of course, but it's a very good rendition of the book. Great cast, great director, John
I
Schlesinger,
need to see it.
Donald Sutherland, Aaron Black. Really, really great movie.
During the writer's strikes, I went to go, help picket or whatever. And my friend Jamie and I walked on Hollywood Boulevard to the Roosevelt. They have a little burger place in there. And they started putting up all the scaffolding, all the fencing for a movie premiere. And it was like the animated Little Mermaid. And I was like, oh no, if I get crushed in the throngs of people during the Little Mermaid. Oh no, it was the
Yeah.
live action Little Mermaid. Excuse me.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
right. Even worse. Yeah.
So anyway, it lives on. It lives on. But yeah, so
Yeah, yeah. No, there are vestiges, here and there, and they do kind of give you that connection, that people don't realize they've severed so many of those connections, and those connections are important, I think. I used to walk down Hollywood Boulevard when I got here in the late 70s, and you would see stars from B movies just kind of staggering along the street or waiting at a bus stop, and I was on the show Fridays, and we would use them. I would come into the office and go, Aldo Ray is sitting at the bus stop right out there, and we would like go over and go, you want to be in something? And he would go, sure. And then or Hunts Hall from the Bowery Boys, you would just see these people in this office building that I was in on Vine. I would see Lawrence Tierney, who had starred in Dillinger and a lot of movies, and then eventually had a resurgence. He played Elaine's father in a Seinfeld, and then he was in Reservoir Dogs, and actually I think got fired off of Reservoir Dogs eventually. Like he didn't wind up doing like the big part, but he was in it. And I would see him like all just battered he obviously had been drinking and gotten into fights and fallen or whatever. And he lived in one of those offices,
Wow.
with the bathroom down the hall and everything. So, and in a way, it was really super cool, to see these guys and be able to talk to them like regular people you had seen in movies on TV, not even the movie theaters. These were like, old black and white movies. So like that connection to me meant a lot, and I still often think about that, that how it's been severed, people not really appreciating the importance of it.
Yeah, it's populated by the characters that are larger than life. They're existing among you.
I lived on Cherokee off of Hollywood
That's right.
Boulevard over there, and I worked at the Larry Edmunds bookstore, which was next to like the Kit Kat Club or whatever it was, great cinema bookstore. So I lived there for quite a long time and loved it there. There used to be a place, if you couldn't afford Musso and Frank, and who could, you would go to a place called Johnny's Steakhouse, which was another block down, and for like $6 you can get like a steak dinner, And I loved all that, and the apartment buildings even were all like sort of a lot of cool old deco apartment buildings that had gone to seed, and also that was a time of like the punk the punk movement was really sort of blossoming at that time. So there's a lot of clubs in Hollywood that I did go to, because I wouldn't go necessarily to a place where I was just going to drink, but I would go see music a lot at the Mass Club or Blackie's, and there was just a bunch of places like that. Or Chinatown had, Madame Wong's, and because they were, nobody was going to Chinatown, so they turned them into punk clubs, and so that was a very kind of and you could see X and all kinds of very cool bands that were also reflecting that Los Angeles in their music, so there was that cultural, like, sort of upheaval that was going on. It was very exciting as well.
So no wonder you're reading these books that take place a couple decades, few decades beforehand. It's like it's connective to
Yeah.
your story as well.
Right. It's like almost autobiographical. I can imagine myself there in a lot of these places. And I'm definitely going to read this Ablutions. That sounds
Yeah,
fascinating.
it's a
I
fun
will
one.
definitely check it out. You should check out Service.
Oh,
I think you'll enjoy
oh,
that as
I'm
well.
going to. I'm already, because
Yeah.
I've known people who work at stories and things like that, and I'm like, oh yeah, maybe he'd be a good guest to get on here. And
He would definitely come on, I'm sure, and he'd probably be a great guest. He's a super witty guy, So, and he's obviously well read. I mean, he could take you to places that I could never do, and I think he'd be fascinating to hear. I've never heard him talk. I know he's British, and
mm,
I know he does reading in town, but he's just his voice in the book. You can kind of get a sense of him.
cool. Yeah, it's inspiring. It's inspiring hearing about that, and yeah, I'm glad people who are among the people are writing these books, because
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Right. It's true. It's true. And they're not, the thing about Pynchon, I go back to Pynchon a lot, but he's like experimenting with the form, and that's important. And I do appreciate that. And I do like that, actually, even, and I always loved that kind of experimental fiction that William Gass or even Kurt Vonnegut did, like in Slaughterhouse-Five, where he's a character in the book as well as, telling the story. But there is something to be said for people just kind of telling you their story, unadorned. There's something very connected about that to you, as a person, and it's not so much of an exercise that's intended to keep you detached. It's intended to immerse you in their world, and those are the kind of books I've been really responding to lately. I'm glad I remembered about Service, though,
yeah,
because that was one in particular that stood out.
but yeah,
Contemporary, a contemporary novel as opposed to something that takes place in the past.
yeah, even connective in its own way. It's like, okay, and here we are
Yes,
now. The noir that we're living is a bit more of
right.
a human noir, and it's less dramatic, but the despair is all the more all equally real. I wanted,
Absolutely.
speaking of bookstores, I wanted to ask. You released your book not too long ago. How's the experience of being a book lover? And I guess I'll ask it by bringing myself into it. One thing that's been very fun for the way I've sold my books is I've done the shipping and receiving on them. And so, like,
Right.
packaging them and seeing where people live, reading their names, getting to like thinking about how many boxes I need in my room, what kind of printer, that stuff's become fascinating to me. Have you found any sort of interesting side doors into the process of getting your book published and traveling around talking about it that you didn't expect, or what's the experience
Funny.
been like?
It's funny you say that because on the one hand, there's a publisher and they have been, kind of providing the bookstores with the book. And I've done readings and I've done signings and stuff like that. But what I do, I have a box of the books. And if I'll bump into somebody or I talk to somebody or I'm in contact with them on social media, I'll offer to send them a book, and I'll sign the book and then I'll send it. And my wife and I, we talk about this all the time because you're talking about the physical reality of having to mail a book out, and so, for instance, there's a musician in Australia named Ben Lee, and he's married to Iona Skye, who was in a lot of Hollywood movies at one time, and he bought the book on Amazon, and he did a whole thing on about the video in a video, and when he got the book, it was an AI like rip off bootleg of the book,
God.
like with a kind of a AI version of the cover, and it was like very thin. My book's like 400 pages, and this book was like like 80 pages. And he was like, "What the hell is this? Is this the book?" And so I got in touch with him. I said, "No, of course it's not the book. I'll send you the book, right?" So my wife and I went to FedEx, to try to send him the book. And it is so expensive to send. It costs like $200.
Oh,
I did it because I had promised him I would. I didn't want to go back on my word, but it cost so much money to send it to Australia. So that was one thing that I kind of learned. It's like, wow, I have to sort of get a little more familiar with with the postal rates,
truly.
because that's a reality. So we experimented. We started, because I have like once a week I'm sending a book out to somebody who's asked for it or who doesn't have it, and I want to give one to, and I have this box of books for that purpose, and I get to sign it to them or whatever. So we've gone to the post office and done it that way. I've gone to UPS and done it that way. And what I have found is with the same envelope, and I don't know if you've had this experience, but with the same envelope and the same book, we have never paid the same amount of money. Every single time. I mean, Australia aside, just sending it around town to Los Angeles, it's like $13 or it's 11 or it's 25 or we can't. And then somebody told us at FedEx, you should say it's media mail. Tell them it's a book and tell them it's media mail and you'll get the best rate. So we did that once or twice and then that worked. And then we went back to FedEx and we said, "Oh, here, it's a book, it's media mail." And they went, "Well, what the hell does that mean? That doesn't mean anything." And I said, "Well, that guy told us to say that. What do you mean? At this very store, we were told that's what we should say." And he's like, "That doesn't mean anything at all. It's like you're supposed to say it's second class mail, whatever." So we got, that's one thing that I have learned from doing this process, like you're talking about, is there's no kind of set
Oh my
anything.
God.
It's like a shoot. Every time you go in to mail a book, it's a brand new experience.
I'm so glad we talked because I've sent out thousands of these. Media mail is real, but it's only with the post office. And it's going to
Right,
cost you
right,
like $4.77. And you're
right.
good to go. But
Yeah.
internationally, that goes out the window. And there are so many crazy. I finally took the international option off of my website because I needed to put tracking on it. The only way to put tracking is because I didn't want to do back and forth. To Canada, it's $42.95. Now with these tariffs, they have to pay money when the book lands,
Right.
another $40 or something. And I'm not letting someone make that decision. It's a terrible decision. Don't. And even Australia, I think United States Postal Office, your Postal Service, you're looking at like 80, $90. So I would say always go to the
And
post
you know what?
office.
I did a second book. Somebody who had interviewed me had like a nephew in Australia who wanted the book, and I was like thinking, "Oh God, this is going to cost another $200." But I went to the post office that time. We went to the post office. I think it was only $40
Nice.
actually, or 50. It was much more reasonable, even though it's still a lot of money. So just that disparity though was crazy.
It's crazy.
But you're right about too. The tariffs have had an impact on all this kind of just trying to send somebody a book has become like an expensive proposition.
Yeah, that's the world I was curious about. There's just these weird things that we don't really encounter in our everyday life, and everything is so virtual now that but yeah, it is a funny kind of comedy. And yeah, sometimes you'll get a different answer depending on the day. Like, hey, is
Yeah.
if I put two books in this, is it still the same price as the original media mail? And so on and so forth. It's yeah, it's
Yeah.
disorienting.
My wife and I are often like, the guy will say, I don't know what you're talking about, and we'll just exchange glances like, can you believe every single time this happens? It's a brand new experience. The clerk is like got a whole different trip. So we've had no real consistency with that whatsoever.
And have the readings been fun? Has just engaging the world with your story been
Yeah, I love
it's
that.
been a good
If I could
time?
be more. Yeah, I don't think they want to truthfully, I don't think they want to spend, like, I would love to go around the country and like read at bookstores. Like that would be fun for me. I think that the economics of, as you know from your own experience, the economics of books has changed somewhat. And unless, like my agent represents Sylvester Stallone as well, so, and that book is going to get a massive promotional push, so, and I found out that unless you really engage a private PR firm or whatever, your book is only going to get so far with the publishing PR people who did a great job, I thought, by the way. I was really happy. But you realize that there is like this hierarchy of, books are not about their literary value, really. Now it's the same as, they're very similar to movies in that respect, and they're also owned by conglomerates, the publishing houses now, like movie companies are. And so what they're looking for is something that will sell, sell large amounts, large volume,
Right away.
and right away, just like the first weekend of a movie. And so, and somebody like Sylvester Stallone, it doesn't matter. It's a different level than like what I'm talking about with John Tottenham or your poetry books. It's very hard to get the mainstream publishers to get interested in that. And I kind of fell in the middle of that in a way. I was trying to write a kind of a literary memoir that sort of was not completely about show business, but was. And, it sort of like fell in the middle. And unless I was willing to engage like a private firm, which is a fortune, way more than sending a book to Australia, you were not going to, I look at what I see now, I become kind of like jaundiced about it. I'll see like a writer profiled in Vanity Fair and I'm going, that they paid for
They
that,
paid for that.
it's, yeah, they paid for that. It's not like, just journalism
No,
anymore or an interest in books. It's about the relationship between the PR firm and the magazine or whatever. And I've accepted that and I'm okay with that. And I still get enough attention for the book that it's doing fine. But I didn't want to like sort of like throw everything out just to get, more attention for it,
100%. Yeah, no, I've been hearing this from a lot of authors whose books are doing well, similar to yours, doing well. But yeah, they're not. It doesn't economically make sense for them. Yeah, because everything's immediate. They're not thinking 10 years down the road, are people still going to be buying this? They're just
Right.
thinking
Right.
what's happening right now. No, I self-publish my books, and so I do the legwork.
Cool, man. That's so cool.
It's honestly, for what I do and the audience I have and the people who are interested in what I do, it makes the most sense economically and everything. You walk away a lot better and more personal. It's more personalized, so there's less waste, and so I can direct my,
Yes.
I bring my books with me when I do a poetry reading or a comedy show, and then I could talk to people after at the merch table. And yeah,
Right.
it's fun. But yeah, I'm also just the shipping and receiving department. And actually, what's funny is here at the bookstore, one of the guys working right now, Scott, I had told Andrew, the owner, you were going to be on the show, and they're both fans of you. And he was like, "Oh, I hear you're having Larry on. My friend almost got him to do a screening at the Henry Miller Library of the Bob Dylan movie because we're like we're
Right.
huge
Right.
fans of him." But then the pandemic hit or something.
Yeah, he's friends. One of those guys is friends with my daughter Pearl,
Okay,
who's a musician, and she, like you, also does all her own, merchandising. Really, she's on tour now, actually in Europe, and she does the same thing you do with the poetry readings. She brings, T-shirts and CDs and vinyl, and afterwards she'll sit at the table and like, commune and talk to the people that have come to the show. And it's a very direct, and I like that very much. And I mean, at some point, I may actually pick your brain about self-publishing, because for the second book or for this novel, that's a way that I really am interested in going to a large degree. And I'd love to know how did you even learn how to do that?
well, I was lucky. My friend Darby Hudson, he's a poet in Australia. He had kind of blazed the path before me. He does, his videos do well on social media. He's got a really cool worldview that appeals to a lot of people, and he kind of lit a fire under me and kind of just told me the basics. So I'm happy to. I've been having phone calls with multiple friends who have been traditionally published who've been picking my brain. So just call me or email me or whatever, and we could talk about it because it's really liberating. And at this stage of the game, it's very helpful. I mean, everyone knows who you are, and so you can go do all the podcasts and things like that, and
Right,
then yeah, you
right,
can
right.
get direct. You can just get closer to people. Like it's about
Yeah.
just getting in person and getting around people and not being obstructed by the bureaucracy of it all. Unless one of these people goes, "No, we love it. We'll give you a bunch of money up front. You're the next best thing to Sylvester Stallone."
It's right. No, I don't think that's going to happen actually. But I do like that idea. Like my YouTube channel. It's like I like the handmade
Yes.
quality of these and the direct connection. And even with this book, which is published by a major publisher, I have made an effort to really connect with people who read it, encouraging them to talk to me about it, to discuss it with them, to deepen it in some way if they would like me to. And so I've loved all that. And even like the podcasts are fun, especially when someone has actually read the book. That's another thing also, which is kind of interesting. I'll do podcasts where clearly the person hasn't read the book. And so they will go to the same kind of cliche questions. What was it like Seinfeld? That kind of thing. And it's like, well, there's 19 other chapters in there about all kinds of other stuff. So people who've read the book, having those kind of conversations, I find always really super interesting. Happy to talk about that. And that to me is the best publicity for the book. It's just me talking about it with somebody and other people listening and then asking questions.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, I've just from the outside looking in, it seems like you've really been engaged with it, and it's been really cool to watch. And yeah, congratulations on it. I've read it. I enjoyed it. It's been cool knowing you and then reading your book and getting this glimpse. Speaking to a world that like isn't there in the same shape that it was when what you're writing about, and it felt very much like your own odyssey through this, like through the bubble almost. It was like this human navigating
Yeah.
the bubble and bringing their creativity into it and sort of seeing where you ended up and who you ended up with. It was really cool. So
Definitely a journey, and the first book is like the first part of that journey that gets me to well, the first book is really the second book, and the second book is really the first
yeah,
book, but the second book that I'm writing is really the first book, and that takes you up to where the first book that's really the second book starts. So and that's part of the story, Trump Village, and being on the road with doing a comedy team when I was a teenager and working through the South, and just like all those kind of stories are I think people are going to find interesting. And also I allude to certain people in the book in Comedy Samurai that I could devote, like my parents, I could devote entire chapters to, because they're from very surreal backgrounds as well, so it's fun to like sort of be able to put that down. I love the act of writing, that's a part of it too. I love putting into words these experiences, and I find that to be satisfying in and of itself. It's like a lot of times I'll say with movies, and I feel this way with the book. I'm happy that and I bet you feel the same. I'm happy that it exists. That's the thing that I really wanted to get out of this. I wanted this to exist in the world. Whatever happens to it is really out of my control to a large degree, but the part that I was able to control is the existence of it, and that I'm very happy and proud of. The New York Times bestseller list. It's like we were just talking a minute ago. All that stuff is so corrupt. It's nothing to do with how good a book is. It has to do with the publicity people and the relationships and all these other things that, just like a movie hasn't, either success or failure of a movie has to do with the marketing and all these other things that have nothing to do with the movie. That's the reality that we live in now, so all we can control is the existence of the thing itself, and for that, and I'm sure you feel the same, that's a triumph. That you got to the point that it can exist. It's real. It's a tangible thing. And that's why I love the idea of the book versus the Kindle, which is like some digital thing that's like lost in the ether somewhere. Here's something that you have to make room for it on the shelf, it needs space, it needs a little space for itself. And I like that,
I do too. I mean, I feel that's like a great way to send off our conversation because it's tangible. They're also sacred, and you may be housing knowledge on your shelf that you're not going to be able to find on the internet soon, and that you're not going to be able to find in a Barnes and Noble like you were talking about earlier. Not every book gets a second, third, fourth printing. Most don't. And so you're actually caretaking sacred information or someone's sacred efforts, their expression in that, and that's it's a really cool thing. And yeah, books burn. My book burned in at least 4 of my friends' houses during the wildfire. But yeah, I mean, like everything, we put some more stuff on our back and we keep marching along that trail.
Yeah, it's a challenge, but it's a worthwhile challenge.
Yeah, really cool hearing about yours. And yeah, what a fun conversation. You got me inspired to read a bunch of your titles and to just keep that muscle going. I've had
definitely. I'm going to read the Ablutions, and I'm going to look up Darby Hudson also.
Yeah, please do.
He sounds like, yeah. All right. Well, of course, Josh, it was great talking to you. I'm really happy we did this.
Same.
Happy to do it. Get a chance maybe to see you in person one of these days too, and that'll be fun. And we'll hang out. And in the meantime, stay well, enjoy, find a bathroom and a kitchen, and we'll talk some more whenever you want.
Thank you, Larry. Yeah, we will indeed.
Okay.
All right.
I'll talk to you later.
Talk to you later. And
right,
bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Turek Books, and happy reading out there. Thank you for listening to another episode of Turek Books. Be sure to like, subscribe, thumbs up, any kind of thing that could help us get listened to or watched by more people. We really appreciated having you and hope to see you again next week with a new guest and plenty of books. Take care until then.